We're gathering here, of course, to remember Christ. And we could be doing that as individuals. We could be doing that, just thinking and meditating on God. So why do we do it as a group? Well, my view, and I've shared this before, I'm sure with some of you, is that God has designed it this way so that together we can form a mutual self-help group to assist us in overcoming our addiction, which is to sin. And it's the most fundamental challenge we face, of course, is to be able to overcome sin. And the general church approach, as you would be aware, is to distance people from the issue. They either pretend it's not actually their fault and blame something else, the devil, or pass the issue on to the priest in confession, and then they're free to carry on doing whatever they like. For us, we're confronted with this reality that we are accountable for our own sins or behaviours, the things we do. And unless we're willing to courageously face the enemy that is within, that is in our nature, we are doomed to fail. So to address this, I want to look at it, of course, from a Bible point of view and think about what's really going on in our heads. And a view based on Bible evidence is effectively confronting the issue that the Apostle Paul describes in the chapter we've just read. And thanks, Brother Ben, for that reading. That which I hate, I do. And there's two parts to our mental processes, the rational part and there's the instinctive part, which of course makes sense. We can describe it as logic and feeling. So let's have a bit of a pull apart of all of that. So the instinct is the bit that we've, of course, inherited from our ancestors. That's the rational bit that we grow. The rational bit is the bit that we grow as we develop. And the interesting thing, is that this corresponds to what the Apostle James talks about as being, hearers and doers, or in other parts of the Bible as hearts and minds. And it's the emotional part of us that actually gets things done, whereas the thinking part is involved in analysing and studying. And if it doesn't reach the heart, then effectively it does become faith without works. So hence we can know very specifically and accurately what's right to do, but completely fail to do it. And that can be compared, and some of you again may have heard me share thoughts like this, can be likened to an elephant and a rider. The elephant effectively is our emotions and our feelings. It actually has a heap of strengths. Love, compassion, sympathy, loyalty, protecting family. They're the things that the elephant does. The thing is, we often think that those things belong to the rational part, to the rider. But that's just the point, and that's the point of the analogy. The rider is completely outmatched by the might of a 6-ton elephant, and yet he thinks he's in control. Unfortunately, the rider doesn't have much strength and can't keep the elephant on the road long enough to get to the destination. And now, in our case, the noble destination that's put before us is the kingdom. So I'm thinking that you'll be able to see where I'm going with this. The reason that Paul describes his struggle, that which I hate, I do, is because the rider, his mind, can't keep the elephant, his heart or his feelings, on the path long enough to get there. Our elephant, with all its inclination to follow whatever appeals to the heart, simply wanders off, regardless of how much we might think about the issue or decide what is right. And that's why the Apostle Paul says, in that state, we are slaves to the old master. We so easily follow that well-worn path. And we decide a thing based on our emotion, and then we can justify it in our minds. And we are very capable of convincing ourselves of what we want to do. And the rider will make short-term sacrifices for long-term payoffs because they're prepared to think about it. The logic appeals. If you do the right thing, you'll get eternal life. There's a logic there, of course. And the rider will follow the map, but has limited reserves of strength and prefers to focus on problems. So the elephant, even though it's so strong, is reluctant. And it's formidable. It's a huge beast. It needs to be motivated. Unfortunately for us, of course, Jesus' teachings are all about how to deal with the emotion, whereas the law of Moses focused on the rational part. You see, the law had all the technically right stuff, but data and instructions do not work. The rider gets stuck in analysing rather than doing, and many have been caught that way, believing that if they can analyse the doctrine enough, that it will all fall into place, that somehow believing that this elegant understanding is going to save them. The attractive destination needs to appeal to both the rider and the elephant. And some of you would have heard of those things called SMART goals. They specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, time-based. That's a business model. And yet that may be all very well in an analytical or a business world. But for a start, the goals that we sometimes make up aren't necessarily worthwhile. And second, they presume that there's emotion, but they don't generate it. To be real for us, it needs to hit our gut. It needs to be something that we really feel. So what I want to follow this morning is making it relevant to us, is to go through a step-by-step process. So first of all, we've got to script the moves, be clear about the steps we want to follow, point to the destination, the attractive future, shrink the change so it's something that we can achieve, appeal to our identity, to follow the path, and to rally the herd. So that's the process I want to work through. So for this to work, of course, we need to come at it from the point of view that people can change. That might sound obvious, but there's many that have a view that runs something like this. That's the way I am, and you just have to accept it. And I'm sure you've heard it. And the Apostle Paul did not accept that. He himself, as we know, changed fundamentally. And he appealed to others by saying, "Be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind." And to reinforce that it applies to everyone, he describes many hopeless cases. And he says, "Such were some of you." Okay, so the rider. First steps. Let's script the moves. And this is what James is talking about when he says in chapter 1, verse 22, being not just hearers, but doers. Because this is the process of translating the rider's thinking into the elephant's action. And as an illustration of something that we can relate to, this is the equivalent, perhaps, to us accepting the truth. Like someone would have made it understandable to us in the first place, someone would have taken the time to appeal to the emotion, and a clear path was laid out for us. So let's address why thinking about it doesn't work. Because the rider is so prone to spinning wheels, like seeing problems everywhere and analysing all the problems to death, but nothing actually happens. The other issue is, of course, our ability to deceive ourselves. And as we know, if we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves from 1 John chapter 1. Our inclination, of course, is to always be overly optimistic about what we can do, our ability and our ability to diminish the sins that we commit. And even if a problem knows what's causing the problems in their behaviours, they're likely to keep on doing them. And I'm sure you've all experienced it the same as I. People don't have an inexhaustible amount of self-control. Think about Samson. It's too hard. It's not fun. That's the things that goes on in our head. And when we're learning a new task, we are careful and we concentrate and we because change is hard. And people then, of course, wear themselves out. So knowledge is not enough to trigger a change. We can't just read the Bible and then think we've got it all sorted. We have to confront the behaviour that is causing us to get to the point where we're able to see it from another person's point of view, and in this particular case, from God's point of view. Unfortunately, with thinking about it, we often come up with more options, and with more options we effectively freeze and we don't do anything. And we go down the familiar path. It's too easy. And the Pharisees did this, of course. As we know, not only could they not change their own ways, but they bound up the converts with so many regulations that Jesus described it as laying this massive burden on top of them, and they were not able to even lift a finger to help them. That's how critical Jesus was of them. So making it simple and clear enables the writer to make the right choices, and that's why what appears to be foolish, simple and straightforward, confounds the wise. Now, and just an illustration of making the steps clear. Think about a study that was done. It was actually in the States, in America, and they wanted to understand why some people make donations and others don't. And they divided up the people into by their assessment, whether they were the people that were generous or the people that were selfish, and they sort of took the extremes of either end without telling everyone what was going on, and they gave them a task to do. They said, well, make a contribution for the needy. And in this study, 8% of the generous people gave a contribution, and none of the selfish people did. Okay, so point taken. But then they made it easier. They said, bring canned food, and they provided a map and a location and a time. And here's the surprise, because then of the generous people, 42% of them made a contribution, and 25% of the selfish people also made a contribution. So clearly, it's better to be a selfish person with a map than a saint without. And that's the point that's being made. We have to make it easy. Given the right path, everyone changes. And so next step is we need to point to the destination. And Paul described this also. He said, this one thing I do, forgetting the past, pressing on forward towards the prize. So we need to keep it simple and focused. And unfortunately, our modern world, as we know, is very much involved in a marketing ploy to make us dissatisfied. There's always something else that we're made to want. And we marvel, of course, at the single-minded focus of the Apostle Paul, or indeed Christ. But they wouldn't have had a fancy bucket list like this sort of like say, oh, well, I really want to make sure I go do skydiving before I leave this world. And that's sort of the thinking that's portrayed around the world. For them, it was this one thing I do. And the reason, of course, that so many Christadelphians were baptised in 1967 was because the message at that time was very simple, and it was speaking right to the feelings. Everyone was feeling it to the heart. So in this day and age, of course, of global uncertainty, we have something to offer to people that are feeling the worries and the concerns about what is going on. The question is, of course, are we willing to contribute it? And the goals that we're talking about, they're bold. They capture the imagination. And if you want to fire up a group of first-year students and get their attention, you tell them if you do this one thing, you're going to be like third-year students. Because first-year students want to be like third-year students. Ordinary people want to be able to inspire others. They just need to be pointed in the right direction. So we need to squeeze out that wriggle room. But in its own right, as I say, that's not necessarily inspiring. You can't just say, oh, well, I'm not going to eat any more fatty food, if that might be the issue that you're dealing with. whatever the problem is. To motivate, it has to give clear direction. Unfortunately, of course, we have been given this in God's Word. That's why we have this unique perspective compared to the rest of the world, which, of course, is generally just chasing off, trying to find what they call satisfaction. And it's an empty chase because it will never be achieved. Well, think about for those of you that sort of ever read Alice in Wonderland, think about the Cheshire Cat. Because she says to the cat, she says, "Cheshire Puss, can you tell me which way I ought to go from here?" And the cat responds, "Well, that depends a great deal on where you want to get to." And she said, "Well, I don't really care." And the answer came, "Well, it doesn't really matter much which way you go." The point is, we need a clear direction and an objective on the path. And so most people actually think that change happens like this. You analyse it, you think about it, and then you change. But that's not actually how it works. Actually, change is see, feel change. For example, seeing the negative consequences will impact our feelings. And that's why we see, for instance, so many confronting images regarding speeding, for example, to motivate us to change. We don't want to end up like that smashed up car and all the people that had died in it. The other more positive way can be a glimpse of the solution, like we've been given in God's Word. So why is it then that people can see that a change is needed, but they still don't change? Think about, it could be, save our money differently, or it could be, I want to lose some weight, or I want to stop habitually speeding, or reduce the amount of time that I spend glued to the screen. All of these things are stuff that we might be thinking about. But this is still because it's speaking to the rider, not to the elephant. You can show the rider where to go, but you need to show the elephant why it's worthwhile. And as mentioned before, that proud thinking about, that's just the way I am, that's of no use to God. It's part of the claim of the serial offender who justifies themselves rather than allows God to get involved. And that is the devil as we know it. So we need to find the feeling, whatever it takes. Otherwise, we still, as I say, will be in that group of hearers and not doers. And some would say that to convince people that a change is needed, then you need to make it a matter of survival. They'd sort of describe this as being a burning platform, which would make you impelled to act. But I actually say that's silly. It says to your feelings that all it says is to you, choose one of two disastrous outcomes. Either stay and burn or jump into the unknown. Positive emotions for us are a much better motivator, like a sense of achievement, because they encourage us to pursue bigger goals and become part of something that's really worthwhile. Contributing something to our ecclesia or to our community more broadly. But some of this, of course, can seem overwhelming to the elephant. So our next step is to shrink the change. And Jesus described this. He said, "Take my yoke upon you. My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And again, to give an illustration, the maids doing the room servicing in a particular hotel chain were quite unfit, carrying a lot of weight, and it was leading to a high incidence of workplace injury. And they protested. They didn't have time for fitness classes. And one group of them were given some extra information about their work and how much exercise they were actually putting in each day. And it turned out that it was more than most gym classes. And the group in that group in the study, well, they started to lose weight, while the rest continued to stay the same. The only difference was that they were aware. The ones who knew how much exercise they were getting became more focused, more enthusiastic about the work that they were doing, and with the feeling I'm getting extra value. And that's not just what's called a placebo effect. It's stronger than just feeling better. It's about realising that you are already on the way to your goal. And those loyalty cards that you get, you 8 stamps on a card and you get a free coffee or whatever it is. The smart operators know that if you give them the card with 2 stamps, maybe 10 spots on it and 2 spots already filled in, that they're much more likely to get used, because people are likely to feel that they've already got a head start. And for us, well, we're already well on the way. We already understand the Bible and we've embraced it. So we've got at least 2 stamps on our card already. And the other thing about the elephant is, of course, that it hates to fail. Having a sense of progress is critical, because we, that is, the elephant, is so easily demoralised and sidetracked. So we can start out on our idealistic journey as a disciple, but we get so disheartened either by our own weaknesses or disappointed by the failings of others. And I'll come back to others soon. But actually, most of the issue is actually letting ourselves down. We need to be realistic about the likelihood of failure, because we have been given an understanding of what sin nature is all about. So we are, of course, prepared to accept that failures occur, but it's not a loss of the mission itself. It's just challenges that we face along the path. So if we can keep in mind that it's sin only because God said it is, not to diminish it, but to understand that God can also say, provided you understand and you see yourself correctly, I'm willing to forgive you. Because failure is a necessary part of change. Without it, if we didn't feel, we wouldn't do anything about it, which helps us in making it more achievable. And again, in terms of making it easier to do the right thing, like the bank was, of course, sick and tired of people leaving their cards in their machines, and, in those ATM machines. And so what they did was they made it so you had to remove the card before you could get your cash. And that's about making the right decisions easier. So like shrink your dinner plates, or put your walking clothes out the night before so they're ready to go. It's just making it easier to do the right thing. And ecclesias, that's why we're together. Ecclesias help us and make it easier for us to do the right thing. And we don't need to look for big radical changes that dazzle those around us. The mystery is that it does happen, but not in the way we think. Because God is the creator of our minds, and the path to success is a series of steps taken together. That's the wisdom of ecclesias. One day at a time, overcoming all the issues that we face. And it's okay if it's trivial to start off with, just as long as we get started. And some people are critical of the routine, of the way, the rituals that we have, the process of coming together each week and going through this process. They don't understand the simple wisdom of these things to keep us going. And as I said, belief in the Bible message of being able to transform our minds is a key. Because a fixed mindset is going to say, I can never get there. Because in effect what they're saying is, I won't even try. And so that becomes absolutely true for that person. That is the one talent person that was described by Jesus. The alternative that is put before us, this growth mindset, means that as it's described in Ephesians chapter 4, we need to grow up in all things into Him. And when we get those early successes, when we do actually I did manage to overcome that. Even in small things, what we're doing is creating hope, which is absolutely pure elephant fuel. Because we know from Romans chapter 5, the same steps, just as we've been discussing, the challenges that we face develop patience. Remember, one step at a time. The patience adds to our experience, and experience, having seen it put into practice, gives us hope. And that kind of hope, as the NIV puts it, doesn't disappoint. That flush of good feeling at the beginning of working through an issue is hope. And over time, it becomes confidence. But we have to effectively go through a bit of a valley in the process, because we've got this start, and then we go through the process of working through the change, which gives us confidence. But in that process, we get insight. We get to understand, okay, I can do this. The struggle allows us to get there. As 2 Corinthians 4 verse 9 talks about it. It says, cast down but not destroyed. And I love the way the J.B. Phillips translation puts it. Knocked down but never knocked out. That's the process we're in. And speaking of things that can dishearten, sometimes we do feel badly let down by others. But we should realise that a problem person is often a problem situation. And we tend to think about it in terms of the way they are, but in actual fact, they're probably dealing with something. And so to think about it, we need to effectively hate the behaviour. It may be something terribly offensive, but it's the behaviour, it's not the person that we're hating. And once we come at it from that point of view, we can make the journey easier. And some things, the same things apply in that case. We just need to make it easier for them to do the right thing as well. Remove some of the friction, make it so that there is a solution that's able to be easily found. The wisdom of Christ was saying, agree with your adversary quickly. It's totally disarming. You do that, and all the heat goes out of the situation. So the next step is to follow the path. And this is where our mind really is transformed. You see, this is about guiding the elephant in the right direction, and shaping the path was what the law of Moses was supposed to do. It was described as a schoolmaster for that exact reason. But it wasn't bad. The Apostle Paul in the reading that we've just done from Romans 7, he says it's holy, just and good. He's saying the law was a great thing. People just needed to listen to where it was guiding. And in our day and age, there are those that would remove some of the clear guidance that we've been given as, to running our ecclesias. The model, as I say, is simple, and it's designed to help us keep on track even when we're having difficulties. And those that would dismantle this process, effectively have spiritual blood on their hands, because the cost can be counted in effectively spiritual fatalities, and I'm sure you can think of some. People that have effectively wandered off the path, and then they're now groping around in the dark without hope of finding what the solution is. So the appeal is to us to keep on the path. We need to seek Jesus while he can be found. And part of this, as I say, is about having a sense of identity. Think about, if you think about it in your past, of some of those fiercely loyal Christadelphians that had an appreciation of the nobility that was set before them. Because these are the ones that can see that the future world is going to need leaders. And remember, we already have at least 2 stamps on our page. We've made the commitment already. We're part of it. So what does an environment look like where you can help each other overcome our sin addiction? Well, effectively, we would surround new members with former addicts who love and care about them and treat them as if they can be addiction-free people. And you give them interesting work to do, using their skills. And you'd have well-publicised sanctions against following sin. And you'd perhaps try and get their partners or their friends to be able to give them a hard time if they were doing the wrong thing. Make them feel even useless or pathetic if they fell back into their old habits. And you'd provide strong cues, to keep our minds on the right track. Hymns, good food, support, reminders of younger, innocent times. And God designed it that way. That's the way it's been designed by God. Hebrews 10 verse 24-25. Let us consider how we might spur one another on towards love and good deeds, let us not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, exhorting one another, and all the more as we see the day approaching. So the pattern is already there. And to reinforce it, the writer to the Hebrews goes on to say in verse 26, if we deliberately keep on sinning after we've received a knowledge of the truth, no more sacrifice is left. And the reason for that is given in an earlier chapter, chapter 6. If we'd done the New Testament portion for today, Hebrews 6, it says effectively they are crucifying the Son of God all over again. So habits are good if they are positive and keep us going, even when the writer is full of doubts. And by the same token, of course, we know that bad associations can corrupt good manners. You can't break a habit if you're in the same company, in the same situation, because the cues are already there for you to keep following the same old familiar bad path. We need to change the equation if we're going to, or if we even want to get a different outcome. And the deal changer is that we are deliberately put into this ecclesial situation by God, by God's design, to help us work through it with others. And Jesus' message with dealing with our emotions is far deeper than we tend to read. Now, we all get the message, perhaps from the Sermon on the Mount, about, if you count your brother as nothing, then it's like murdering him. But think about it in a deeper way. What he's saying is that if we're involved in a situation where, because of our behaviour, our brother thinks of us as nothing, then we're effectively putting them at risk of dying. It's putting an obligation on us and the way that we behave, because we can have an impact on others. And that's, I guess what's actually required because, commonly people would think, well, I can't help what people think about me. But Jesus is saying, sorry, you don't get it. That is the mantra of the proud person. To be transformed, we need to be pliable in the hands of the potter. And so we come to our final step, which is rally the herd. And this is what is spoken of by the Apostle Peter when he says in 2 Peter 3, he says, stir up your minds. And that's where the ecclesial role really does come to the fore. Because in unclear situations or new challenges, difficult scenarios, we all look to others for cues as to what to do. Sitting at the meal table and waiting for someone else to pick up the bread roll so you know which one is picking up. Now, it's at these points that, we need the courage of Elijah to say, and he says, how long are you going to halt between two opinions? If the Lord be God, follow him. And the principle, of course, is that we, perhaps in the story of Cain and Abel, Cain didn't get it, but we are. The message is very clear. We are our brother and sister's keeper. That is what we are here for. And we've each been given, the opportunity to give constructive help, so we need to do it. And so, of course, we now come to the emblems which are before us, the example that Christ gave to us. And to summarise and conclude, let's just think about how Christ was able to succeed where we so regularly fail. Because you can see that he gave us the model to follow. We can see that his life effectively helps to give us confidence in the way that we operate. Because Christ was acutely conscious of the battle that was going on between knowing what's right and actually doing it. In his temptation, he showed about how to push back on those things that appeal to the heart, about needs and about wants and about personal worth. And he showed that he wasn't just a hearer of the word, he was a doer. He put it into practice and he gave clear direction. His messages to his disciples in his sermon are as relevant today as they ever were. And he pointed to the clear destination, the kingdom and everlasting life. And he himself took a very simple and straightforward approach and advised us to take that light burden on ourselves. And he followed the path that was set before him by his Father. And it's not to say he did it easy. Yeah, he was near exhaustion and he did struggle, but he struggled and he won. And in rallying the herd, his message was very clear to his followers. He said, "Feed my sheep." And an example of serving others, he said, "Go and do likewise." So in following his example, we can be transformed and we can help each other reach that noble destination.